Welcome to the third video in Section 8, Working with Server-Side API. In the previous video, we were working with the client-side API and we implemented our example using connection level, host level, and request level. In this video, we will take a look at low level and high level of server-side APIs. Let's get started. The server-side components of Akka HTTP are split into two layers. The basic low-level server implementation in the Akka HTTP core module, the higher-level functionality in the Akka HTTP module. The low-level server is scoped with a clear focus on the basic and necessary functionality of an HTTP server, such as a connection management, parsing and rendering of messages and headers, timeout management for requests and connections, response ordering, as well as things such as managing TLS for secure connections, and so on. But all high-level features such as routing, simplified file serving, or compression are implemented in high-level APIs. In high-level APIs, Akka HTTP provides a very flexible routing DSL for smoothly defining RESTful web services. Depending on your needs, you can either use the low-level API directly or rely on the high-level routing DSL, which can make the definition of more complex service logic much easier. Let's implement the Hello World server. We will start with low-level implementation. Akka HTTP is implemented on top of Akka Streams. So, when we need to implement anything on low-level APIs, server or client, we think about streams. What is our source? What's our sink? And what's our flow? A socket binding is represented as a stream of incoming connections. The application pulls connections from this stream source and, for each of them, provides a flow to translate requests into responses. A socket bound on the server side as a source, incoming connection, and each connection as a source, HTTP request, with a sink, HTTP response. So, the first thing we need to do in the low-level API is defining the server source. We will use a bind function that takes host and port and will return source, incoming connection. Now, let's create the HTTP server stream and run it. Let's connect our source to a sink for each connection on our sink. We will print a message. Incoming connection instance contains the remote address and some methods to provide a flow that handles requests coming in over this connection. Requests are handled by calling the handleWith method that takes a flow, the handleWith sink handler method that takes a function of HTTP request and HTTP response, or the handleWith async handler method that takes a function of HTTP request and future of HTTP response. We will use handleWith sink handler, which means that the flow we've given to HTTP synchronously converts a request to a response. Of course, internally, it may do an asynchronous operations. Now, let's define the request handler. In case HTTP request has a method, get, and URI for root, we will generate HTTP response containing the hello message. Otherwise, we will generate HTTP response with 404 status. And these to unbind our server and shut down the actor system when we press enter on shell. Now, let's run our simple server. Our server is running. Let's check from the browser. Yeah, it's working. Let's try any URL. Yeah, it's a 404 message. Excellent! As you can see, Akka HTTP is a full web server. It prints error messages and hints in case the user ends up on the wrong page, and so on. Now, let's use the high-level API. Instead of defining the flow or function that handle requests, high-level APIs provide a flexible, domain-specific language for expressing your service behavior as a structure of comparsable elements called directives. So, we will use the routing DSL to define our route. This is the structure form of the route block. So, let's define our route. Our path will be the route, and our method is a get, and on completion we will return a hello message. Now, let's start our server. We will use a bind and handle method that starts a new HTTP server, and will use the given handle to process incoming connections. Now, let's run the server. Our server is running. Let's check from the browser. Yeah, it's working. So, to wrap things up, we were introduced how to implement a simple server in low-level APIs and high-level APIs. See you in the next video where we will implement the REST API.